that's just I want to know what they're going to do for the sport I love most. Because a lot of these people are successful. They're attorneys. They honestly make quite a bit of money. You know?
I think you have to be very well off in order to want to volunteer to basically run for a volunteer position. You mean you don't get paid to be president of U.S. Soccer Federation?
But aren't they going to change that?
They should, but I don't know if they will. That's the question.
I saw a report, but that could just be fake news.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, Steven's the king of fake news. But let's talk about some of his discussion points.
Yeah,
I really was interested with his idea of having those national soccer facilities or those state soccer facilities. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is this is coming out of obviously the budget of that surplus, right? What is that going to do? And is his system going to, I mean, you know, change for change's sake doesn't necessarily mean always good things will, you know, happen. The outcome might not necessarily be what you want it to be just because you change it. So I'm curious to know more in depth on how the financial ramifications are going. Because if you're going to put one in every state, it's not cheap, right? So
maybe you regionalize it.
That I think you go to more and the regions can be relatively small. Like, for example, I would almost put one in the state of California and the state of Texas because they're just so big. But like the Northeast, the New England area, put one there. Bang. Then you could put one in the Midwest.
Right, and that'll cut down some of the costs that you'll have. I mean, if you're gonna make a full-on fledged facility, it's gonna be an expensive investment. But if you do it the right way and compromise and, you know, do it, you know, in a regionalized way, you're going to save a lot of money. I mean,
yeah.
It'll cut down travel and whatnot.
Another interesting idea that Winograd talked about, and he really I feel like he has a passion for this, it's the coaching aspect and how I think it's very critical that some of our coaching isn't good, especially at the youth level. And the confusion among parents, let me tell you from personal experience, it's confusing even when I grew up. The differences between the leagues, payments, travel, tournaments, how much it costs. Like, soccer is not a cheap sport, and when you add confusion on top of that, it's not good.
It's the coaching aspect of things. I mean, at times we don't have the best coaches out there. I mean, part of it has to do with how hard it is to get a coaching license. I mean, we talked. It's crazy. We had this interview on the second episode of our show, but I keep referencing it, and you keep referencing it with Fred Kaiser, who's a high school soccer coach, and he said getting those badges isn't easy. It's tough.
It's tough, and it's time. Costly.
It's time consuming, and
Yep.
The thing is, it might not even be the money, but these guys can't afford to go, you know, take a week off from work or something to go and try to get a coaching license or something like that. It's a very time consuming. It's also very expensive as well, and that's preventing, I think, some of our more brilliant minded tactical coaches to, you know, or when I say tactical, but you know what I mean, coaches to actually showcase them and become coaches for the youth, and I think that's a really key issue as well. But Steven, I wanted to ask you. He seemed very passionate when he talked about the women's game, and he also really proposed, I thought was a really interesting idea in terms of having them play at those big stadiums. Because, I mean, I know Orlando City and the Portland Thorns, or Orlando Pride and the Portland Thorns, they play in their respective stadiums, but which are the MLS-owned ones. But, I mean, what do you make of that? Do you think that'd be a positive, or do you think...
So there's two routes of my thinking. First, for example, New England. Where do they play, the refs? They play at Foxborough. Would the women's also want to play at Foxborough? Unfortunately, I don't have where they play in front of me. If you have the moment here as I talk, if you could look up where the...
Is there even a women's team in New England?
It should be. It's the Boston Breakers. I remember watching them a couple years ago on Fox... Was it Fox Soccer? When they used to broadcast the games.
They play at Harvard.
They play at Harvard, so it's closer to downtown, and I think that's an issue. Now, if in his case, he talked about Rutgers and Red Bull Arena, and he says it's not too far. Fine. Obviously, he pointed out the issue of opening up the stadium, right? FC Dallas in the U.S. Open Cup played at SMU because it was too costly to open up Toyota Stadium.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, if we're going to do that for the women's game, what are we going to do on the men's side to help the cost of putting teams in soccer stadiums? Why doesn't, what about NYCFC? They're playing at a Yankee Stadium. What about Louisville? They play at a baseball stadium too. So we have to be very careful on how we spend the money, because if he wants to run a campaign on equality, which we're both for, we absolutely want the women's game to be number one, and we want to dominate. We want the women's team to step on the field and shouldn't be a question. She should win 3 or 4-0 every time. That is how dominant the women's team can be, because we've seen it.
We have.
If we're going to talk about equality, then we got to make sure that we do not go down a road that's only pointing one direction. It's a two-way highway. We want to make sure we elevate the women's and men's game, whether it's through the leagues, payments, surface, where they play, how they play, the uniforms, all of it, right? The problem is, I don't know if people will go watch the women's league, because I think the women's game is starting to trend to Europe. If you look at where the English league, the English women's league is getting traction. PSG, for example, the marketing of the women's game in Europe for some reason is so much better. I follow a lot of clubs on Instagram. Let me tell you, they tend to do a lot of crossing. For example, Arsenal, my favorite English club, every time there's like a holiday, they will get the men and women to make one Christmas card or video, whatever you want to call a holiday video, right? Here in America, it's segregated. Honestly, you don't even hear much about the women's game. So
no, you don't. You're right. You're right.
It's sad. Maybe you and I could do it, but most fans probably wouldn't know that there's a professional women's team in their town. So
no, you're right. And I think the interesting dynamic of what he's suggesting might be that, I think it's an interesting idea, but like you said, I don't know if the interest would be there, if that makes sense. We saw what happened with the NWSL championship. Granted, Orlando wasn't playing in it. It was at Orlando City Stadium, and it was just relatively empty. And they have to have those neutral site games because they like planning that in advance. They need to plan in advance. That's how they're going to maximize their money. But I think you're right. It's an interesting idea. I think it really is an interesting idea.
It's a very interesting idea, and I would be for it to see if it works. Maybe you trial run it for one season. But you also have to make it smart, because if you put the women's game in Boston from Harvard to Foxborough, I guarantee you not a lot of people are going to travel, because Foxborough is not that close to downtown.
And Foxborough's on turf.
And that. But is Harvard on grass?
Harvard's on turf too.
Okay, well,
so it's not much of a change, but I think they should maybe push towards. I think it's a fine idea, but it's just, will you attract more by opening up? As the skepticism was said when Michael was talking about it, will they attract more if they open up Red Bull Arena compared to
I also think we have an issue with the women's league in general, in the sense that it's not marketed well whatsoever. Europe does a way better job with their women's game. They have the Champions League, you have leagues, you have domestic cups. We don't even have a domestic cup. And do you know how many, second division, semi-professional women's clubs there are?
FC Dallas Women.
Yep. I interviewed the general manager and coach last March. And a lot of the financing was raised through fundraising and volunteering, or just, people donating to the club. And
they donned the name FCD Women, but they almost received no monetary support from FC Dallas.
Which is sad. I don't know why Dallas doesn't just put them
Take
there.
advantage of it. Like, come on.
Yeah, you could work together to promote the game. But that's where U.S. soccer should be really, I think, developing the women's game. It's not necessarily at the top level too, but really getting to those smaller, semi-professional.
So kind of like what Paul was suggesting, an open cup for women.
Yes, I think you have to do that. You have to allow women to, like, Michael talked about this. Talked about how he wants to grow the game and allow women to see that they have an opportunity post their careers, correct? He talked about how, I think in his eyes, he sees them seeing, okay, I could do soccer for 10 years and then I can find a job in X. I can maybe go become a coach. I can become, join the hierarchy of U.S. soccer, or maybe even, say you want to jump to MLS. You get, you start coaching there. You maybe coach a youth team for one of the women's teams, or you jump to the USL and you coach there. I don't know, whatever it may be, but that's the issue. And I think that's also an issue on the men's game, is that what are we doing to help men realize, okay, just because you play for USL doesn't mean that you suck. You still should have the opportunity to play. And this promotion and relegation thing is really interesting. I see how he could implement it, but I don't think it works, because if he wants to relegate USL teams and you would buy 2 expansions, the league's at 30. That's huge. And
well, I mean, you could implement it right now, to be honest with you. And when, let's say Cincinnati comes in as 25, right?
Mm-hmm. Miami's 26.
Have Beckham United as 26, and then 27, 28 be those USL or NASL sides. Just those 2 guest spots open. I think it is a relatively interesting idea. I don't think it will please the people who are clamoring for an open system. Of course not. You'd also have to figure out a way to have those either 2 of those divisions or 3 of those divisions work together. And I think it's going to be your toughest thing. I mean, we're already seeing it with the NASL and U.S. soccer lawsuit. I mean, they're honestly not working together. USL and NASL won't work together. You see teams leaving we just saw the Indy 11 move from the NASL to USL, which might be the dagger. I mean, hopefully not, but we'll see. So you have to have those guys working together, and it's a lot of logistics. I do think it is an interesting dynamic that could be used as a way to kind of progress to promotion or relegation full blown. So, for example, you start implementing that maybe 2023, 2024 in hopes of seeing how it will work out, kind of an experimental phase. And then maybe by 2030, okay, we can, if it's worked out, okay, we can consider or going into promotion relegation if that's someone's platform.
I would be interested in seeing the women open up a promotion relegation because they're so small, and U.S. soccer funneling some funds and say, you know what, MLS, we want an open system. If you don't want to, we're going to take some funds and we're going to experiment with the women's game. We're going to actually channel quite a bit of funds that direction, and we're going to see what we get, because I think a lot of people would be interested in seeing that actually happen.
I think the women's game is just too damn small now.
Right.
But if a team gets relegated, I think it'll be destroyed.
Well, not necessarily, because you have the 2 divisions, and I'm forgetting what's the division that the
WPSL, the second one, and
yes.
NWSL.
The PSL has over WPSL has like 99 clubs or some absurd amount, and they go through this conference. Then you play regionally, then you play in your conference, and then you play nationally to determine the winner. Why not be like, okay, we're gonna put some funding into it based on your rankings. That's how much funding you get, like you see in the Premier League, you see in other leagues. Higher position, the more funding you get from the federation or from the board, or however it is. In England, it's the FA, and from sponsorship money. You do that the women's game, and you see if you can get those clubs to start changing, because I think you would instantly see a rise in talent. You would see a lot more competition. I think you see a lot more interest, because you'd be like, hey, come support your women's team. They have a chance to be promoted, or they have a chance to be relegated. We need all the support so we can get these 3 points and get above the survival line. So
yeah, but by the way, I just want to mention the WPSL has 112 teams, 17 conferences, and 4 regions. It's an absurd amount. I I mean, we'll see. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, I honestly do like what Winograd has been saying in regards to his ideas because they're not like crazy ideas and they're not like all talk no action ideas. I think honestly, I think most of its ideas can be thoroughly implemented